This is Worship Excellence, Our Utmost for His Highest, Friday at 2 o'clock, room 20. Mark Johansson et al. Good afternoon. Welcome. This class is entitled Worship Excellence, Our Utmost for His Highest. And this is a workshop in which we are going to explore some of the details and nitty-gritty particulars about the way that your worship looks, right? So some of you came earlier this morning. We talked about worship visuals with specifics to slides. In particular, this is going to be a bit of a broader conversation with 5 of us total, myself and my 4 colleagues from Christ Lutheran in Charlotte, North Carolina. We'd like to just go around the horn and introduce ourselves briefly. So again, I'm Mark Johansson. I'm one of the ministers of music. We have all our names up here, together with Mark Glazer. He'll introduce himself in a second. And one of the responsibilities that I have, in addition to worship playing, service playing and preparation throughout the week, rehearsals, etc., is worship slides. So my contribution to that is involved in that way.
Next. My name is Bill Porter. I know some of you already, but I'm the technical director for Christ Lutheran. My job is to make sure that all of the equipment involved in worship is up and running. So typically every single Sunday morning I get there about an hour and a half to 2 hours before everyone else. I get everything turned on, make sure it's all working. If there's a problem, I troubleshoot it and fix it before everyone else shows up. And then also make sure that it sounds good and is ready to go.
Sure. All right. My name is Thomas Cole. I'm the IT director for Christ Lutheran Church. I deal with most of the things that aren't necessarily worship related in my day-to-day, but as we've discovered, technology for worship and technology for running your office are one and the same. So I'm pretty involved with worship, trying to just keep things running on the Sunday morning. I'm the guy that they yell at if the internet decides to go out for half a second and everything falls apart. So that's what I get to deal with, and it's a lot of fun. So, yeah.
Sure.
I'm Alexis Williams. I am the online minister. I have a full-time position outside of this job. It's a part-time position for me. And I am monitoring the online chat and online worship on Sunday mornings and yelling at them if anything's going wrong.
Awesome.
I'm Mark Glazer. I'm the minister, also a minister of music. I share that job with Mark. So 2 Marks here, yes. I've been there the longest, so this is actually my team. And we are a congregation of about just under 3,000 baptized, and before COVID, we were worshiping a little over 1,100 on a Sunday. So that's kind of who we are. Charlotte, North Carolina, one of the most church cities per capita in the U.S., one of the most treed cities per capita in the U.S., lots of beautiful trees, lots of churches. Right on our road, which is Providence, we've got all the largest churches in their denomination for the whole Southeast. So Episcopal, Methodist, Lutheran. So that's kind of who we are. Worship is the most important thing that we exist to do as a church. Let me say that again. Worship is the most important thing we exist to do as a church. That statement often gets people looking at me like, the church does lots of things. Yes, the church does lots of things, but the most important thing we exist to do as a church is worship. Next slide, please. It's a biblical mandate. Think of the first commandment. It's what we're supposed to do. It's also, missions, outreach, Sunday school. All those things are important. But people come to church primarily for worship. Yes, you've got the person that wants to work in the soup kitchen, and that's how they got in. But the average person that's coming to your church is coming there to worship their Lord and Savior. I'm not sure what I was there. Worship leaders before you said, yeah, we can. And giving jobs like us, to have a church like ours where we have this many people on staff that's focused on worship, is a blessing given by offerings too, or what I would say, potentiated by offerings, if you will. So it's the important thing that we do. It's also, most of us here are Lutherans, and it's constitutional for you as well. If you look at your Missouri Synod or ELCA constitutions, Wisconsin Synod as well. And that comes from Martin Luther, where he talks about the importance of the word being preached and the sacraments administered rightly. So that's what we exist to do as a church. So if you accept that statement, who advocates for worship needs in your church? Who beats the worship drum? I'm really big at that. Spoiler alert, guess what? It needs to be you. Someone needs to point this out. church councils don't necessarily know this. They're thinking that the food drive and Sunday schools is important, and they have these areas they might even relate to with your elders or your church council. Someone might be assigned to Christian education, some might be assigned to worship and music, all those things. But this is so someone needs to be beating that worship drum. Is that reflected in your staffing? I guess you can see it is reflected in our staffing. And a concern that I have is that you're going to tune us out, because there's 5 of us up here, and you're thinking, yeah, well, we're not that big of a church. No, a lot of these positions can be filled by volunteers, and a lot of them have been. In the 32 years I've been at Christ, this is new for me to have this size of a team. Thomas has been here a year. Bill's coming up on a year. So we have evolved to this and grown to this and established. And I beat the worship drum saying, okay, if you want to do that, if we really want to improve our online worship, Pastor, then I'm going to need some more help with this. We're going to have someone whose focus and full-time attention is dedicated to that. So I have beat that drum every time our senior pastor has said, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. I've said, okay, let's do that, but then we need this. So someone's got to beat that worship drum. It's reflected in your budgeting. If it's the most important thing, it's also biblical that, where our treasure is, that's where our heart is. How much are we spending on outreach? And I'm not here to debate all those issues, but again, to say that worship is the most important thing we do, that's going to demand some financial repercussions. Is your church council aware of that? I already gave that. Giving statistics will show you, well, in the days of COVID, I would contend that probably the most significant, most of us need to report to our higher bodies annually. The annual report to the bishop is called for us. And they want to know your attendance, they want to know your giving, they want to know what was your benevolence, they want to know all this fact. How many did you have in Sunday school? Well, of course, COVID has taken all that and flipped it on its 180 degrees. But how's your giving doing? Our giving's been okay. How about how many people have had their giving okay? Yeah, so you're doing something right. People are still, they're not going to invest their dollars where something's not compelling. So you're doing something right. Next, when you're looking at staffing for worship, many of the things I've told you can be covered by a volunteer. But you probably have had great success with some volunteers and less success with other volunteers. Again, so as our senior pastor has pushed, or as our leadership team has said, well, let's do this, and let's really focus on our online worship. Then I've been beating that worship drum and saying, okay, but I need someone for whose attention this is going to demand their time. I don't want someone that's going to give me Tuesday afternoons and Thursday mornings, between the hours of 9 and 11. So again, done that. So we work closely as a team. Our office is in a house, an old historic house. It was a Sears and Roebuck mail order house, ironically enough. But so it's like bedrooms, and everyone's in a bedroom, and so we actually end up relating to each other as staff, pretty much like brothers and sisters. So hey, Bill,
Get over here.
So yeah, so it's very collaborative, and that really works well for us to work as a team. So again, and then you need to advocate for your team. No one's going to beat that worship drum. Senior pastors are pulled in lots of ways of saying we need money for this, we need a parish nurse, we need this, we need that. Worship's the most important thing we exist in the church. Bill.
So this is where I get to come in. So minimum requirements online. First, you have your sound tech, in person and online. Super important to have 2 separate people. I talked about this yesterday as well in my class, but you can have where your in-room sound is also the same as your online sound, but you're going to run into problems where something's too loud, something's too soft, but in the room it sounds great. But you don't know that because you're not able to monitor both. So finding a volunteer that can learn how to do that, and even if you can get them talked into being out of the room, if that's a possibility for you, that's a huge plus. Then you have your media director, who's in charge of all the camera shots. Also, this person is in charge of lining up the volunteers for who may run any sort of cameras. If you don't have any cameras that you need to run, you can, and you have an iPhone, that's great too. But you at least need one person who's in charge of the media direction for the online service. If you have a sound person and a media person covering both, the ball's going to start getting dropped. You're going to have a lower quality worship service, and then you're going to start hearing complaints from other people.
How many of you have multiple cameras? Everybody, so you know what we're talking about. Good. I've seen so many churches where they've sent me their video that I consulted with them, and they remember Thomas, and they show us, and it's
one
like
phone.
an iPhone in the back of the
Here at
church.
this angle.
We hear the pastor. I don't know where he is. He's not in the screenshot, you know. And then, oh, there's the pastor. Okay. And now the choir's singing. Now where is? They didn't even bother. And then there are other churches that do this. Zoom in. And, you know, it's like, so yeah, multiple cameras is a huge thing. We had people that were right away when we went to online. There was a few people that saw the importance of it and gave us a gift of money to further that.
Yep.
To clarify on the in-person and online sound tech, are you mixing a second feed for your?
Yeah,
online?
so
like-
jumping into that just a little bit, I mean, if a lot of churches I know still have analog boards. If you're able to get digital analog boards and run it from an iPad, then you can certainly accomplish having the in-house sound, and then somebody jumps on an iPad and they can walk out of the room, put on some headphones. You don't have to have a big broadcast suite. You can jump out and still do something like that, but definitely being able to do that.
Ryan's
from
got a comment.
iPad, yeah.
Do y'all have this on the app or somewhere I can get these notes?
Yes, actually, yeah, before we continue, we have a website that Thomas has put together, bpm.christlca.org. You can follow along with these things if you don't want to write everything down. Everything that you're seeing up here is going to be on that website, including the other workshops we presented. So check that out on your phone or laptop, so you don't have to feel like you have to get everything down.
The slide deck is slightly different though. Videos didn't transfer over, just so you're aware.
It's probably for the best. Most of them are really good.
Which is the point. We're going to embarrass ourselves here in a minute.
And
So
you'll
just
see it
buckle up.
on-
It's going to be good.
And then lastly, we've got the button pusher. This is actually more important than you may think. A lot of people, when they say, yeah, I'm the button pusher, they get laughed at. But it's like, actually, no, you really are a huge part of it, because if you have somebody who, you know, maybe a high schooler who's sitting up there who hasn't been trained, they're going to be late on advancing their slides. People aren't going to be able to sing together, these sorts of things. So you need to be able to have that button pusher, but you really need 4 volunteers in these different positions. Nobody can be overlapping, because again, you're going to start having the ball drop. There's going to be things that get missed. It's just not going to be as good as you would like it to be, and then you're going to get frustrated, and you're going to hear complaints, and you're going to also, they may get burned out, and they may decide that they don't want to be there anymore. So, yeah.
Talking a little bit about.
Oh, yeah, question.
Excuse me. Yeah.
Sorry, and if you're going to get into more detail on this later, that's fine. But, you know, on the dual feeds, right, the online piece, that's something we really need to move to. I get the simplified version for the out-of-room experience, and it's really important to do that. Do you have separate feeds for each of the instruments and singers, or how does that get split out so that the 2 sound people aren't competing with each other, right?
Yeah, so that basically you would set up an aux send, and then the aux send would be controlled by the iPad. So say you just decide you want to do aux 2, you know, you use aux 2, and then what an aux is that that's all the same channels that are being sent to that aux. So you can manipulate all the channels without affecting in-house. The only thing that you can affect in-house is if you try to adjust any EQ from that aux, because it will adjust the in-house as well. And same thing with effects. If you start to try to adjust how much effects is coming into the effect channel, then that's when you're going to start to affect the house too, and then it gets super wet in the house, and you get some feedback, all kinds of things.
But you can adjust levels from each instrument
Yeah.
separately.
Yeah, so you can manipulate everything individually, separately, if you set up like that.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Let's talk about budgeting a little bit, because a lot of this can't happen without the resources to have the equipment, right? You know, every classroom, for instance, here at Christ Lutheran has projectors and screens. You know, this is equipment, this is cost, and it's equipping us to be able to do this conference. Same thing is true about worship. But a big thing, of course, is personnel costs if you are hiring your staff. Again, yes, things can be done with volunteers. There is definitely, if you are capable to do the route of hiring somebody, even if it's just 5 hours a week. There are a number of people who serve on our team who only come on Sunday morning, who are 5 hours a week, right? And then they are expected to come for Good Friday, Ash Wednesday, et cetera, that sort of thing. But a big part of this too is focusing on what kind of equipment needs replacing, and having a life cycle plan so that you are thinking ahead instead of being reactionary when the soundboard explodes and then you can't have church. Our current sanctuary at Christ Lutheran was built in 2013, and already we are starting to have to replace equipment that was purchased then. Right? It doesn't seem like it was that long ago. It was 9 years ago. Technology doesn't last forever, folks. You know,
So
you
who's
have to have that.
who's advocating for that? Who's telling the pastor or your finance committee, we're going to need to replace this equipment that's going to cost X dollars? That needs to be you. You're beating the worship drum.
Right.
And longevity on equipment, it usually lasts 6 to 8 years. Even if it's brand new, you know, give it about 6 to 8 years. You know, how many times do you look at do you have a flat screen television? You know what, it lasts maybe 5, 6 years. So, you know, you have equipment like this that's being ran as full and as hard as it can, it's going to run out.
Yeah,
Is that true with microphones? I hear different stories about.
Depends on how well you take care of them. You know, if you don't take good care of them, then yeah, they'll die maybe even sooner than 6 years. But if you do take good care of them, they can certainly last up to 10 years too, and whatnot. But
Other things that have to be considered as far as budgeting, things about ongoing subscriptions. If you pay for a looping video download site, general stock audio, pictures, whatever, something like that you have. Perhaps you have a software subscription like ProPresenter or something like that you need to be paying on a regular basis. You know, and fortunately, those are fixed costs that you can then send to your team, and it's not going to be a huge sticker shock surprise. Another one is copyright licenses. This is a no-brainer that every church needs to be doing because it's following the law. If you're using music in this way, then that's what you have to do. It's just the way it goes. But then also looking further on down the road, not just replacing your equipment, but also getting new equipment and doing new purchases and sort of dreaming and saying, you know, if we had X number of dollars, we could buy this. When I was a student in college studying music education, our professors always taught us, when you are a teacher, you need to have a wish list. Your wish list has to be broad and diverse, right? So if you get a gift of $100, you can go buy something and say, thank you for that gift, we have purchased X. If you get a gift for $10,000, right, somebody passes away and leaves a large endowment or something like that, you then have that thing on your list that you can just go buy, rather than depositing the money and not really having a plan. So it's good to think about these things ahead of time. We're going to go back now and rewind the clock of time, sort of pre-COVID, and this is where we're all going to start cringing. Yeah, Ryan, if you're hitting the lights real quick, we're going to enjoy together some examples of what our worship looked like pre-COVID, and this will be humbling. Oh, is the sound on?
Yeah.
It's on.
How dark his face is.
It's on. That's our senior pastor, by the way.
The worst thing that ever happened to God.
All right. Where's the organist? Do we see an organist? There's the choir. There.
that was before I got there.
That was before I got there, too. Yeah. And Mark was on full disclosure, none of us were there. That was when you were on sabbatical. So it was
That's right.
So a couple more here. All the way back to
This dry and desert land, I tell myself keep walking on.
There they are.
A little late.
Here's something on
Oh,
my
the video
hand,
starts. There we go.
water falling like a
All
song.
right. And now let's finish the same song. Three words.
Jesus Christ is risen today. Hallelujah. Our triumphant holy. Hallelujah.
And of course, how many times does that word?
Copy paste every single
Yeah.
Every single one was hallelujah. All right.
So right after COVID, I am very immune compromised, and so at the very beginning when COVID happened, I suddenly was homebound, and for about 2 months. So I watched what this team was doing online, and I wrote notes, and we're trying to worship with my wife, and she said, "Is this what this is going to be like?" Because I had the notepad in my hand, and I'm just, oh God, this is terrible. Oh my God, that sucks. Look at what's in the back of that shot. Oh, let's move that music stand. I mean, I was pages of notes. So then we would have our Zoom call. Don't you love Zoom calls? And talk about all those things. So we built the building in 2013, and the consultant that did our audiovisual stuff said, Mark, you need to make sure that you get on Facebook with worship. It's going to become a thing. You need to live stream your worship services. I was like, okay. So we put the equipment in place, put it in the budget. So we got it all. But it really was the red-headed stepchild. I was like, this is a service that we're providing for those that are at home. If you want to come to church, come to God's house. And that was really my arrogant attitude. But suddenly, when I was home and I saw what they were seeing at home, I took a different interest in it. I didn't, for me, going back and watching worship and what happened and all the things, it's torture. I don't know about you, how much you love going back and hear yourself sing or play or watch the service. You're like, oh my God. So I seldom reviewed it, but now suddenly I was forced to. So I guess that's me. So suddenly I took a great interest in it, and like I said, I just wrote tons of notes. Like, who's preaching? Where's the pastor's name? How do we give an offering? All those things. Are those covered later?
Yeah, we'll talk about this. Yeah. So COVID hits now. All right, it's March 15th or whatever that day was, that ominous day that will live down in infamy. So here's some of our services that we started, and this was the first couple of Sundays that you could see. I don't know why you can't hear anything, but we started to look at those. So March 29th, I think that was the first Sunday that you, Mark, were gone from that you were staying home.
Right.
So, all right, our speaker went to sleep. We good? All right, so now you can see in the video, you can't hear it, but you can see we're starting to get a little bit more edgy and creative with our use of things like lighting. We're starting to pay more attention to the sanctuary. And one of the benefits of not having any congregation in there was that we could kind of play with that a little bit and be a little more creative. No one was in the room during the week, so we kind of got to do had a little more freedom with that. This is our band playing.
Come on, stand up.
Stand up, right?
Really, camera's just shaking like crazy.
But still, the slides are new, right? There's the music stand sticking up there. There's no one sitting up there. I mean, why is that 5 feet there? You know, it's all of these things. Look at all the cables and junk and the piano.
He is strong and able.
Right, and then see the camera waving a little bit.
You got the fan.
We didn't realize that there were subwoofers.
Just all the fans everywhere.
All the fans.
Should have been one who's here.
All right,
So with this, first off, one of the before our mistakes is chancel clutter. Coffee cups, thermoses, coats, purses, personal belongings, instrument cases, untidy cables, unused chairs, music, and mic stands. One of the big things that I've seen is the band just putting their cases wherever, and that just looks awful. So getting in a good practice anywhere and everywhere, in all really aspects of your musical groups that are at your churches, is to be able to, first off, find a place that the band or musicians or performers can put their coats, purses, and cases, so that they always know that's where they're going to go every single time. And there's never a question. You never have to go up and remind them or bother them to put it up, and then deal with anybody being like, well, I want it to stay there. Why can't it stay there? You know, so, and whatnot. And then, so then also we got our instrument cables. You got XLRs hanging down from the piano over here. What's that over
Actually,
there?
the piano's on fire there.
Oh, and the piano was on fire too, but I didn't like that either. So,
No, not great.
so yeah, we fixed that. But the piano's on fire. You got the XLRs hanging down. What's that over there?
more cables.
Yeah, more cables just dangling over. So, then you have your lights and your cabling just sitting out. People who are just in a rush, not super worried about it, and they were just like, yeah, let's throw it out. Same thing with all of this back here. Yeah. It's just, it doesn't look good. It looks unpolished. It looks unprofessional. It leaves room for people to just kind of be distracted from worship, And as I said yesterday in my course too, is that we're here to provide a distraction-free worship service. And so this is part of it. We just got to do our best to remember all of this. So, Oh yeah, it's still me. Then audio problems, in-house versus online. You know, just, I mean, that
Well, the
kind of
beginning
goes.
sound- The first
yeah.
couple Sundays when I was hearing the sound, for traditional worship, the organ had no reverb. It was, the mics were in the organ chambers themselves, and it was dry as it could be. An organ needs the room to reverberate and sing in. So we had to change the way the organ was mic'd. I mean, it was just all kinds of stuff. Our online sound was so disappointing.
Yeah,
Choir,
and-
the whole thing.
And I mean, and that's all been kind of trial and error too, you know, because well, at least for me, I've been there since May, so I've just been kind of, you know, it's a new room, certainly getting to know it, but it's also about the microphones that you're using, how you position them, where you put them, and yeah, just like he's talking about, the organ had direct inputs, and it wasn't ideal, but it wasn't bad either. It's just, you know, you can only EQ it so much without it being affected in the room. You know, and so we didn't want that because we don't have a pipe organ. We have an electric organ and whatnot. And I mean, it's got speakers all throughout, but all that stuff. Then you got balance and EQ. Certainly want to be paying attention to those things as well. With balance, as long as you're balancing instruments and singers as far as choirs go and just kind of supporting singers and band, you balance them either left or right. And that way you also kind of get out of the way, make some room in the sound. You kind of have your soloists coming through right in the center. You get, you know, if you have a contemporary band, it's kick and bass. The organ, obviously, you're not amplified really. It's just already takes up everything. And then same thing with EQ. If you have problems, you know, being able to get in there beforehand and just kind of, you know, cranking up the EQ and just kind of moving it around, just so that you can figure out where maybe you hear a hum, you know, you hear that constant, you know, it's like, man, that's annoying, you know, but I can't figure it out on a Sunday morning because then you may run into all of a sudden you've got a squealing sound and it's hurting everybody's ears and whatnot. So being able to do that beforehand is important. And then communicating with personnel, that's a huge part of this, you know, and I've heard it a lot this weekend, you know, but if you don't communicate with your personnel, they don't know what to expect, and then they're not set up for success, they're set up for failure. So over-communicating, I think, is a big plus in that.
Give a specific example, if I may, on that. We started realizing that our online sound engineer didn't know that the flute was going to introduce this hymn, or whatever, right? Is this going to start on piano, or where? So they had no idea what to unmute. You know, and they're buried up in the sound booth. They can't be, you know, watching over the railing all the time. They have to know. And so we had to start telling them, so we make it real clear in our.
Well, and that's the case of a volunteer too.
Right.
But a real important volunteer, but he's a volunteer, so he's a postman and he can't come to rehearsal and he can't, you know. But
Yeah.
He shows up on Sunday.
And it's a good rule, you know, whoever the leader is of the worship service or whoever the leader is of your tech team or whatever, take at least 10 minutes right before the service starts just to make sure that your volunteers do know what to expect. Walk through the bulletin, make the notes that you need to, or portray that to whoever the tech person is. You know, hey, can you please make sure that the team knows and those sorts of things. So again, you're setting them up for success.
if there's a video illustration in the sermon, will the video fire? Does ProPresenter or your software, does it actually fire like it's supposed to? You know, it doesn't always. So
Right.
check that.
And the same thing with muting in person, but not online, you know. So you mute the pastor, and then if the volunteer forgets to mute him online, you're going to hear the pastor breathing or wiping her nose, going to the restroom, all kinds of things, you know. So you want to make sure that they understand it's like you're doing the same thing that I'm doing. You have to really be actively mixing. You have to be paying as close attention as you can. And
Let me tell a little story there. So
Yeah.
one of my first Christmas at Christ, it was the old building, and it's a chancel up front with side doors. And so the senior pastor at that time is sitting there in his chair, left his mic on, and the lay reader is reading Isaiah. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. It's a beautiful lesson. He's got this fabulous voice. English teacher reading with all this dignity and everything. And one of the ushers pulls the senior pastor out the side door to tell him of this. We had freezing rain. So here you hear the people who walked in darkness have seen it. Shit, Pastor, there's water everywhere. This disembodied voice. It was not muted. Christmas Eve, Pastor, there's water everywhere. Oh my God. Oh my gosh.
Should we see, I mean, so as far as seeing online, should we leave those other channels in pre or post fair?
Say it again.
When you're mixing auxiliaries or like an online situation on the same board, you don't have a separate thing. Should you have them as pre-fair or post?
I'd have this pretty fair. Yeah.
We have a video example of the muting in person but not online. This happened during COVID. This is our countdown.
Check, check. There it is.
Whoops. And that's not the pastor's fault. That's the tech team's fault, right? It's because we didn't communicate. We didn't think about, and so now that's on YouTube. So, anyways. All right. Go on.
So a lot of our before mistakes, since live streaming was a secondary thought, when we first started, our live streaming rig was a very old Mac tower that it was fine for being the redheaded stepchild that didn't have to do much. But then you suddenly need to start streaming to YouTube and Facebook, and we're doing all this extra production stuff on top of it, and it quickly grew. It was unable to do its job, so we replaced it with a newer machine, switched to OBS, which was the software we still use today, and with that we had some audio-video issues. You'd see someone's mouth move, and then half a second later, oh, there's the audio, or other way around. You'd hear the audio first, and the video would come in later, just because we don't. At the time, we didn't have a way to time code everything together, so there was no synchronization there. So that that was trial and error for the first little bit, fixing stuff like that. Streaming services, we used to go through the ChurchFlow service. Now we're at a point where we stream live directly to YouTube and Facebook. But the problem we ran into with ChurchFlow is it would do our replication for us. So we would stream to it, and then that would go to Facebook, and we had a larger viewership on Facebook at the time. And with COVID, everybody started using ChurchFlow or similar services. They were based in the Amazon Web Services cloud. And we were at the mercy of their platform. They didn't have the bandwidth on their end to support all of the churches that were trying to stream. And as such, they would start just turning off services, not church services, but their product offerings, just at will to help keep their systems running. So Palm Sunday, Facebook just dropped out, and we had no control over that because ChurchFlow just said, nope, we do not have the bandwidth right now, sorry. So we have moved away from there since that. Holy Week, we started with live streaming directly to YouTube and Facebook, and we do use 2 machines for that, one independent feed for each, so that way if a machine runs into hardware issues and crashes, we can redirect.
Which is more resources. Who's beating the drum and saying, we're going to need to add a second computer? It's going to cost. Yeah. Who beats that drum?
Some other mistakes that we made, and we'll show you just a couple brief examples. Font sizes and layouts on screen, right? There wasn't enough contrast. It was too small, it was too hard to read. Sometimes things were actually too large. The lower thirds actually started turning into the lower 2/5, and then the lower, kind of 3/8. It was like, it's taking up too much room. And they were just inconsistent across the board. It just looked like a mashup of fonts. Too much text all at once. It was hard to read. It was clunky. It made the worship look bad. This was a great example of something we tried doing, but we didn't realize playing with alpha keys in OBS that there would be a transparency. So the word down here on the first line at the end is obscured because it's the same background color as the baptismal font. You got 2 white texts right there. This is an even better example of a shot of our cross, but the window is in the background, so how are you supposed to read those words? There's just not enough contrast. It's not clear enough. Thomas.
So turning around to look at your screens was we have we would never say we trained our senior pastor. We have a confidence monitor in the back of our room for pastors to get up, or whoever's on stage leading worship at that time to look at. In ProPresenter, we just do the simplified view with the words. We would run into issues where, since the pastors were used to being in-house and we weren't thinking about it, they would turn around and read the text, the scripture, the lessons off of our
Cursed is the
screens.
man who does not obey the terms of the covenant. The terms I commanded your forefathers when I brought them out of Egypt, out of the iron smelting furnace.
Which might be okay when you're in the house,
Right.
but when you're watching that online.
Yeah.
And the benefit of this, I know we're talking a lot about online, and you might not be here for online at all. But online is a mirror in many ways of what's going on in the room. That same clutter we're talking about visually, it's there when you're in the room, right? It's also visible when the camera zooms in on it. So let's clean it up one way or the other. I want to say one more thing about that. Under the train your pastor thing, the pastors we had behind the altar, then there was the prayer desk for them to kneel at. So then for the prayers, the pastor would disappear. And you might see the bald spot over the head of the altar, and that's the prayers of the people. It's like, okay, so now we've changed it. Now the prayers are from behind the altar, facing the people, always. Traditional, contemporary. Yes, sir.
So a few times you've gone back to the subject of advocating on behalf of what's needed for online streaming and doing it the right way. Do you pull data? Have you pulled data? Have you done anything to kind of justify this is the result? These are the things we get out of having a better online presence. I know how these conversations can go, and it's like, I'm just wondering what you did to sort of, other than just simply saying we need this. Usually data helps, I guess.
I can speak a little bit to that.
Go
So,
ahead.
a lot of it is feedback from your congregation. We didn't have the ability to do like a pure A/B test, like have half of a live stream over here and half of a live stream over here that do two different things to see which one worked better. But a lot of it was just feedback from members of the church. He has a brother in Colorado who would watch our services every week and still does. And every week on our call we get what's called the Brother Steve Report, where he'll tell us what he liked, what he didn't like, and that doesn't necessarily help set how we do things, but it helps influence how we do things. So, and a lot of this also was gradual change. We didn't suddenly just 1 week change everything from looking, papyrus font and just clutter everywhere to being clean and pristine. It morphed over time. Small little things, small tweaks that you can make, stuff that you can just say, we tried this, it didn't work as we expected, so we're going to go back to what we know works, and what works you just keep doing, slowly change things, and eventually get to where we are.
Yeah.
Sorry. We are also very blessed to have a lot of independence with what we do. We don't, strictly speaking, report to the higher ups. We don't report to our pastors with every little change that we're going to make. We are given the freedom to do these things as long as it doesn't impact the overall flow of worship.
And we've also gone online. I know I've spent a lot of time myself going on just YouTube and Google, and first starting with the local churches, just seeing what they're doing, seeing what it looks like, seeing what's working for them, what's not working for them, and those sorts of things, and seeing something that's like, that's really cool. Maybe we could try that. There's nothing wrong with us borrowing and trying things from other churches, and then from there, maybe think of some of the big churches that or maybe you have a home church. So see what the home church is doing. They're not getting it together, so that kind of stuff. But certainly just doing.
We often talk about these changes in our worship planning meeting. We have a slide about that soon, and we'll present this idea in worship planning, and the pastors are there, and we'll tell you about that meeting a little later. A lot of it happens there, but a lot of it was also emails that I got. My title is Minister of Music and Worship, so I am the worship guy. I order the wafers, the wine, I've got the volunteers in the altar guild, all that stuff falls under my jurisdiction. So I do have a lot of freedom with that. I probably know the manual on the liturgy better than our pastors. I've done this a long time, so no official polling. But like, for example, the idea of the pastor praying from behind the altar came from a congregant that said, we can't see. We want to see the pastor praying. It's part of us feeling like we're in the room. Someone else said, when you're doing the prayers of the people, can you show, can we see the congregation with heads bowed? So can we see a group shot so we feel like we're part of the corporate body praying? So a lot of good feedback like that. That was Brother Steve that did that. It was a question.
Just to speak to that for a second, I did read something. I think it was from even the Missouri Synod that said 30% of the people who were attending before COVID don't plan on returning. And that's a statistic enough for me to make sure that we present a good online presence so that they're not just going to Google another church and then like, oh, now this is my church. And when they are comfortable to go back, they're going to go back to that one. You know, so that's enough of a piece for me to be like, we're enhancing to make it better for them.
A lot of what we've progressed to is a lot of, borrowing from other churches that are doing things. Elevation is a big one down by us. We're not trying to copy them, but they certainly have the right ideas and things to point at and just say, this is how it looks for them, this is what it could be.
We're going to get back to
I want to follow up on the outcome question, because my understanding of the worship service, and like I say, I'm not an expert like you folks, is that it's intended to grow our faith in Christ and His teachings. And so, what evidence do you have that any of this is helping to grow faith in Christ and His teachings?
Sure. Did you hear that statistic right behind you?
What was that?
30% of people aren't coming back.
Well, I'd like to know what we need to do to get them to come back. Are you looking at why they're leaving?
I think it's our job to throw the seed.
Yeah.
I think we throw the seed.
100%.
And I think we throw the seed in any way we can. You throw it in Sunday school, you throw it in worship, you preach well, you make screens that are edifying, that are living stained glass, if you will. You have music that edifies the word, that illustrates the sermon.
Success be attendance? Would it be amount of money donated, or I mean, how?
I think the new thing is the question I asked earlier: how's your giving? Because you're not going to get this. You're not going to get the viability out of your attendance thing. Attendance is way off. For most people, it's less than half.
So it's money.
I'm saying that's a good indicator of people that are still very much part of your ministry.
That's
as measurable things go.
Okay.
There are some things that are subjective, and I talked about this earlier in our workshop about visuals. There are some things that we can come up here and tell you, this is subjective. Your context is going to differ from the local context, whereas some other things are objective. Giving is objective, right? $1 is $1 here, where it's $1 there. But when we do something that's subjective, and we say this works best for us, it might not work best for you. So
now
I
my
think
confusion is trying to understand the difference between a Broadway production and what you're doing.
Sure.
Because they measure their success in ticket sales.
Sure.
And you're telling me you do the same thing.
It's a great question. I'm glad you used the word production. I want to go off of that for a minute. I recently took this position about 2.5 years ago, and I did not move cities. And I went from a Missouri Synod to an ELCA church. And some of the people at my church that I left were kind of, they kind of stuck their nose up and I said, you're doing a production. That's a production. That's not worship, right? And my response to them was, all right, I have a 2-year-old child and I have a wife. When I come home on Tuesday night, it's 5 o'clock by the time we get home, and there is a ticking time bomb inside that 2-year-old that's going to go off if she doesn't have dinner by the time it's 6:15. Tuesday night is not the night for us to cook beef bourguignon, right? We're going to do macaroni and cheese and hot dogs because we need to eat. Whereas on Sunday or Saturday, we have more time. This is the day to do a big meal, to do, if you will, a production. We have time to do this. This is a gift that I give to my family. I realize we're getting off topic here, but I want to answer that very, very clearly. Yes, this is a production. This is a production because it's our utmost for His highest. And if we're not putting our best foot forward to create a production in our worship, we are in the wrong line of work.
I think the big part of that is who's your audience, right? It's who are you producing it for? And I think the biggest thing that all of us, whether we're worship leaders like me or an IT, is why am I doing this? What's my motivation? And if it's my motivation to point people towards Jesus, and I feel that our congregation loves the lights and the haze machines, then I'm going to use that as a tool. And so I think that's the mindset. Is this for me? Is this for people who are coming? Or is this really for Jesus? And I don't think Jesus cares either way. I quite honestly do not care. I don't think He cares whether we use lights or haze or not. It's a personal preference. It's a church decision. And that's what we need to do.
I think we're naive if we don't think that every service we do is a production.
Right.
I think at the core of production, I don't have Wikipedia in front of me, but it's a presentation for people. Of course, I think God is the audience of our worship. But if you think that baptismal service isn't a production, if you think that the way you light the candle, the remembrance candle for that family and hand it to them, and look them in the eyes and say, what's the phrase, Scott?
Let your light so shine.
Let your light so shine. I mean, the way you do that, the meaning that you're going to convey to those people, or you can give them, yes, light this candle every year on the anniversary of the baptism. I mean, have you seen that worship?
Yeah.
Yes, you have. It's all production.
Yeah.
I couldn't disagree more. Sorry.
I just want to speak to, I really like your analogy. We're sowing the seeds. And with online worship, we're not measuring, we're not aiming for quantifiable measurements, but removing distractions for the viewer. Because I know 300 people who would see those early live streams and they would be distracted by those cables, wouldn't see anything.
Yeah.
Correct.
And so we're, you know, quantifiable data is wonderful. I'm not that kind of person. I don't deal in, I don't deal in numbers.
I want to be careful that we're not getting too far off topic what we're talking about. This is a great conversation, but I'm also keeping an eye on the time. So I think if we can continue, that would be great. So Thomas and Mark.
So yeah, so I'll go through here real quick. Another issue, you know, color balance. We didn't really consider white balancing any of our cameras before we started really focusing on this. So
Pastors looked really suntanned and
we encourage suntans and all that, but not when it makes him look like an Oompa Loompa on stage. It's probably not what you have. So there was some tweaking there that had to go on. We do a little bit of color correction now, and it generally, for the most part, looks pretty good. Yeah, so pre-service, just the communication. This was a major failure on our part. We have timers that count down, both in-house on our conference monitor and then on our live stream as well. And they would just hit 0 and nothing would happen. No one was paying attention. No one knew that worship was supposed to start. We time our preludes so that, 11 on the dot, our pastor will walk up there and say good morning to everybody because our prelude has just ended. And we would not get those times right, so it would be 10:55 and there'd be no pastor. So just not everyone being ready to start. That was a big issue that just came down mostly to communication and just a little bit of process to how we.
And for me, that was a big, if I may, that was a big change as far as feeling like a production. It felt more like a production, but as a musician, who's the very first thing, we're going to do a piano organ duet for the prelude, and all of a sudden the lights come up, live streams up, go, you got to play. It's like, no, you're musicians, and that's us. We're paid, right? We can deal with that, but what about your volunteer musicians? That's not fair to them. So. Clear communication with all that.
Overworked tech crew. Something that we have run into and we've been working on fixing now is just having multiple people doing the same thing, or they're there every single Sunday and they never have relief. And so obviously, the best thing to do is find more volunteers. But the question is, how do you do that? You can certainly put out an ad in the church just saying, hey, we need tech volunteers, but a lot of times people aren't going to respond because I can't run a mixer, I can't run a camera. Or it's just a very intimidating sort of task. But being able to ask certain people, not be afraid, and certainly with your connection and with talking with different people throughout the church, you may have somebody who you're talking with and they're like, oh man, they might actually be good. So I'm going to ask them. I'm going to try to get them involved and then just kind of slowly train them, have them come shadow for a Sunday, and then start growing that way. And yeah, the quality suffers. It starts to become mundane. Once they're there every single Sunday doing the same thing over and over and over, it's just like, gosh, this is boring. So it just isn't as good, isn't as exciting. So
I was just going to ask you, you touched on it. How much time do you invest into technical training? Because as the technology gets better, the gap of new people coming in who are butts in seats gets bigger and bigger, right? And it can really affect quality. How much time do you typically, if you're bringing somebody else in, before you're comfortable letting them run sound or do any one of those things?
So on that, first I like to, sit down with them, have lunch, have coffee, just talk about it, tell them what it all means, and then I just gauge their interest. So once they say that they're interested, then I'm like, okay, why don't you come and shadow this Sunday? So usually that's within a week span. Have them come shadow, then check in with them after that, see how they felt, and maybe have them shadow 2 more Sundays, and those 2 Sundays have the sound tech, let them get their hands on the faders while the sound tech or the media director or the camera person is there, just kind of being like, oh yeah, remember to do this. And then the last Sunday, you can still have your other volunteer come, so usually about a month. You have your other volunteer come, you just, then they're just standing there and just kind of overshadowing the new person. So that way they just see how they do, and then you're ready to go. So.
Some of our best tech volunteers are middle schoolers.
Yeah.
So we've got a Wednesday night program, Wednesdays together, and as part of their offering, the first 45 minutes is choir, and the second 45 minutes is the tech offering. So they eat it up, and they're so excited for all the advances you're talking about.
Yeah. Let's go on, Alexis again.
Okay, I get to talk now. So I don't know if you all have dealt with copyright issues, particularly on Facebook. So obviously we learned early on to put our licensing information everywhere, overly done. We do get flagged on YouTube if they don't do anything. We were running into a lot of times where our service would be muted, and then that portion would throw up the whole thing. And so the whole thing would end up on Facebook poorly laid out. We have a dedicated person now, and about halfway through COVID we started, and he will refute those. But more recently, we've decided to expire our live worship from Facebook shortly after it's over. I will take the link from YouTube and upload it over there on Facebook, and then we don't run into any of those technical issues with that stream.
That's made a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. So we use Facebook as a movie theater and YouTube as Netflix.
Yep. Great way to say it.
Yes.
Wait, say that again?
We use Facebook as the movie theater, and we use YouTube as Netflix. So they can go back and rewatch it on YouTube, but Facebook is just where they can all connect, watch it live, and then we're done. Because
There
Facebook
is the
just
majority
an
of
issue.
chat.
Always.
I monitor the online chat, and the majority of folks chat on Facebook. So I do keep that open for them. I do have the chat available on YouTube, but it doesn't get nearly the traffic. So I just focus over there on Facebook.
So when you delete a service from Facebook, you're deleting all the chat? Or you disable the video?
It's expired, so
Okay.
I can still get to it
Got it, okay.
to check all of that.
You just can't watch it.
Right, you can't watch it, but nobody can also comment on somebody else's comment either. They
Right.
can't respond.
At that point, no.
Okay.
Our chat is mostly a lot of praise,
Yeah.
welcome, and.
Talk about the inappropriate chats.
Oh, we'll get to that.
I think that's a bullet point of it.
He's getting Nancy. So we'll speed this along here. So updates, you don't want it to be Sunday morning, and Windows Update decides, hey, I'm going to ruin your Sunday morning. So have a change, freeze Windows. So like Monday through Wednesday, do all your updates, do all your software change stuff then, and then freeze it. And then make sure it can't do that on Sunday morning. Make sure you test it. Don't decide to change how ProPresenter looks on Saturday night and then walk in Sunday morning and suddenly everything breaks. It seems obvious, but we left automatic updates on and it bit us in the butt a couple of times. Green screens, so we initially tried green screen keying, so you'd have the ProPresenter output with a great big green background and then whatever the text was, and that led to the example shown earlier where the lower third would not key out correctly. So that led us into exploring options for alpha keying, and then NDI is the protocol underneath that we use to send from ProPresenter into OBS. Alpha keying is baked into that, so it's just a checkbox. It's great, and any modern computer with a half-decent network card should be able to handle it, no problem.
So the importance of rewatching your own worship services. This is something that I do every single Sunday. I go through and watch all the services. I don't necessarily sit there and watch the entirety of it, but I do scrub through. I get to the songs, I get to the sermon, and I get to where maybe there's a new microphone being used, like the lectern, just to see how it sounds. And then I make notes for our online sound person, so that way they know what's missing, what's not, those sorts of things. But it's super important because, that's really a huge way of improving your quality a lot faster. And even if, and you can also ask whoever's mixing your online sound or in-house sound to be the one to listen to it first and then say, what do you hear? Come back and tell me what you think we need to have, and then let's discuss it. Because you'll have your own thoughts, but if they're starting to kind of listen to it too, it starts to try to train their ears a little bit to just kind of find their own mistakes and whatnot.
We're going to jump 2 slides now.
Sure.
when you're watching your worship, does it give the online viewer, I mean, what's the purpose of your online worship? I believe it's to help the body, the corporate body that doesn't feel safe, mostly, to come worship with everybody else, a chance to worship at home and still stay connected to the body of Christ. And I think that's reflected in your offerings, that there's still a connection. I have another brother that does the same thing in Colorado. And I consulted with his church and with Thomas, and we had them show us their online worship. Oh my goodness, Easter Sunday, they had, you know, on the pulpit, it's a pulpit with the arms around, there's a water glass, and then there's a Diet Coke. Easter Sunday, the lilies are in the background of the shot. You know, they had some extra folding chairs, so they had like one of those folding screens off to the side, and the chairs are kind of stacked up and sticking out over the screen, and you can see it through the screen. Oh my goodness, we looked at there, and the camera shot was the fixed, and they had 2-3 cameras.
They had they had a couple of cameras, and they just weren't utilizing
They
them to the
weren't.
best that they could.
You didn't see the baptism was from the, you know, from here to there. I mean, it was like there's nothing close up of the child, of the water, of the hands pouring the water. I mean, all that stuff. Cleaned up. They were a great example. They had crap everywhere, and they had stuff in front of the altar. I'm like, really? In front of the altar, they had a conductor podium and a music stand. I'm like, music's important, but I don't think you should be in front of the altar. You know, flowers, pyramids, candles, crosses. Can the online worshiper get a sense of the holiness of the space? Are we getting that same sense of, can we capture any of that sense of awe of the holy in what's happening visually? Thematic colors, if you have lighting, and we do have lighting, you know, is it purple in Lent and blue in Advent and red on Pentecost, and you know, to go with pyramids and everything else. So pulling all the liturgical elements together in one. Who's in charge? That's a big question. I told you that they put that in my job description 32 years ago, and had 2 pastors that have really supported that. It's very subjective. Does this person have taste? Whoever is looking at all this and saying, we can't leave this here, this is in the way of the font, or whatever it is. Do they understand a worship aesthetic?
And you have established credibility, if I can brag just a little bit. So in 2013, you were involved very heavily in the design of the sanctuary, and it's a beautiful space. And so you have established that credibility. So what I'm saying is, if you have people in your church who have established that credibility, maybe they are themselves interior designers, graphic designers, whatever, those might be the people you want to seek out.
I wanted to be an architect, but I didn't do this. So,
this is more fun.
Do people know how to stay in their lane? You know, I might have this idea, but I'm going to run it by the senior pastor. I'm going to, you know, we're going to run it by the worship team. We're going to talk about this. People skills are really important. A lot of this happens because of relationship. I remember when I first got there, again, in the older architecture, there's a dossal. You know what a dossal is? It's a fabric that hangs in a frame. This is a colonial-looking room. So there's the fabric that hangs behind the altar. And so on Good Friday, the pastor would pull down with fishing line and weights this black fabric that would come down and cover the dossal and be very dramatic with the black. Well, when you're, God, it's Good Friday. That's not Good Friday. So I had the idea, let's put the dossal down, let's paint the wall behind it black. So now the dossal gets lowered real dramatically on Good Friday and on Monday, Thursday with the stripping of the altar. And it comes down and there's the black right behind it. I had, of course, the altar guild person was like, you are going to paint behind the altar black? I said, it's going to be covered by the dossal. It's going to be okay. And she trusted our relationship is what let me actually get that through. So the pastor was good with it, but altar guild was kind of in my way with that. And then how do you repossession volunteers for success? Gosh, that's a big question, isn't it? Sometimes they're not in that best position. And so as you're managing them and the friction of the disagreements, I think my biggest the litmus test for me is, does this build the body of Christ? And so I will use that phrase with them. What's going on here is not building the body of Christ. We have a disagreement between, well, because we've got contemporary and traditional, we have two different altar guilds, traditional and contemporary. And there was friction because the person at traditional did, I mean, just, you can imagine. So, you know, I had to sit them all down and say, this isn't, we're not gonna have a worship war. We're gonna build the body of Christ. And we need to work together to make this happen. We're in charge of some of you're distributing communion together. I mean, we're working on this together. Let's make this happen. We want to commune the body of Christ. We don't want to have a war behind the scenes about how we got this communion together. So that's some hard conversations, but you got to do it.
A couple of things that we found to be very important as far as worship service, particularly online, is talking about tell your online worshipers what or who they are seeing. And so if there's somebody up there, you know, I mean, when Pastor Scott comes up at the front of the sanctuary every Sunday and says, "Good morning, welcome to Christ Lutheran," everybody in the sanctuary, give or take any visitors, knows who he is. But people online, we can't make that assumption. So that name tag, pops up and says Scott Suskovic, Senior Pastor. Or, you know, Ryan Ritzman, pastor of Christ, whatever, you know, whoever the pastor is. Perhaps we're live streaming our congregational meeting, and there's the treasurer. Well, I don't know, who's she? What's she doing here? And it says Kelly Addison, church treasurer. Oh, okay, right? It makes it much more accessible. Song titles and copyright. Again, I said this earlier at my last workshop. If we're going to play a Passacalian fugue in G minor or whatever, and an organ enthusiast is watching, and what was that? That was great. I'm gonna go look that up on YouTube. Then the title is there. The title and the date of the service or the event. When we start live streaming something in the middle of the week, it's a funeral. Oh, that's what it is, because it says so-and-so funeral, right? Same thing. Is this a traditional service or a contemporary service? Which one is it? And I want to show you all just briefly, jumping ahead, some of the things that we show. One of the things that we show for we call it our pre-service announcement video. It's the 10-minute countdown timer. So 10 minutes before the prelude starts, we show this video for all of our online worshipers so they know they're in the right place. They can hear the music. It's just generic music, piano. I just played this on the piano, 10 minutes of whatever. But it tells you, okay, my speakers work. It says, welcome to traditional worship. I know I'm in the right place, all right? Oh, there's some giving information. Great. You know, I can do my giving on that site. And the timer is there to say, okay, I still have 9 minutes. I need another cup of coffee. My child's crying. I need to go change the diaper. Let's go do that real quick. And then I know that service is going to be done and ready in that amount of time. Meanwhile, at the top, you know, 3/4 of the page, we have slides that rotate. And these are created by one of our staff members who creates announcements. And these are all just, you know, things that get put out in the weekly email blast and the Facebook and everything. It's just all the communications. So this is what it looks like. And then after that time runs out, blah, 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 blah. This is the next thing that we see in worship. So then this is the introduction to worship. Traditional worship.
The fact that you're joining us today means that you are living out our text for today. Hebrews 10 says, don't neglect to gather together. And we do that online, we do that in person, and we do it so many ways that we can be the body of Christ together. Thanks for joining us.
And then as musicians, when we see this video, we know you better be in place. Because when this video is done, it's time to start. Because then it clears and the cameras go on. So this is indeed where it does feel like a production. Because it is. Because we are producing worship and we are trying to do it well. We hope we are doing it well. But all of these steps that we then create as consistency in the way that we do our worship makes it much more accessible and enjoyable for us as worship leaders. Sorry, I gotta find where
Quick question.
There we go.
So if you are doing a pre-service musical piece instead, how do you fit that into what you just showed us?
That comes before the prelude.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's going to start probably at 15 minutes before the hour.
One of the things we do is we will time our prelude. You know, we've prepared it, we've rehearsed it. Okay, it's 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Whatever.
So then
add that to the 10-minute timer. and subtract that from the start time of the service. And then that's when that whole thing starts.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you do it before the piano music that was.
Exactly. Yeah, so there'll be a live prelude, of course. We'll get to hear that as well.
In order to improve the communication between the pastor and the online audience, do you provide the pastor with feedback regarding his body language, his eye contact, etc.?
Yes, and one of the things, as we saw, the turning around, that's a great example, right? To say, you don't look good when you turn around. But we do. We work together on Monday morning. We have a worship planning meeting where we will recap everything that we've talked about, that we did in worship the previous day, as well as then look forward to the next week. So it's fresh on our minds. That's why it's great that it's on Monday morning. We can say, oh, okay, that didn't work, or whatever.
I'm just kind of wondering if anybody hears from the seminary. Is the seminary preparing pastors to establish contact with these online people? I mean, are they giving them, lessons on how to do this?
No.
Then the applicant may have a test if he hasn't done this work ahead of time.
Yeah, good. All right, Alexis is going to be next to just briefly touch on these things.
Okay, Thomas has helped me to make sure we have several QR codes on the screen. We have one for the giving page that'll take you there. We have one for our Christ Kids TV. It's just an important way for people to be able to quickly move to our website. We have several ways and a screen to talk about online giving during worship. The YouTube channel, that's obviously where we're streaming, and then we store our videos on YouTube, and our designer creates the thumbnail images so that everything is clearly labeled and looks consistent. Contemporary worship all has its same look and feel, and traditional, etc. There is a bulletin PDF, like a PDF of our worship bulletin, on our website each Sunday that gets updated on Friday afternoons. And I, myself, or whoever I have chatting, will share the link to that so that it's easily accessible to people. And the same with the children's message. That is saved on YouTube, and I'll share the link so they can easily go to that.
Do you have a preferred QR code generator?
Oh.
So there's a few good ones if you just Google around. I also, if you go to the website up here, there's in the extra section, there's one on there. It is as simple as it gets. You just put it in, hit the download button, bam.
Are you using separate QR codes? You use a link tree or what?
So for our children's message, we used to do a separate QR code for each week, because they changed the message each week, right? And that just got a little tedious to have to do, so we made a playlist on our YouTube channel, and we just point the QR code there. We do separate QR codes for individual things. It does depend on the context. Usually, though, we found that just updating a QR code weekly, just because of how ProPresenter handles its props, it runs the risk of something breaking. So it's just easier for us to point you to the broad area where there's links to that get further down if you need to.
I wish we had a screenshot of the wish we had a screenshot of the website. It took a while for us to get this, and I beat the drum for it. But we needed a tab right there at the beginning, and we have a banner that moves at the beginning. And now it's mostly about worship, the banner. But if there's something else important speaker coming or whatever, the banner will shift between several events. But right there on the top is worship online, so they can find out when the worship services are, and then they can find out how I worship online. It's just front page, and again, I think since worship is the most important thing that we exist to do as a church, I fought to get it on that very first screen, and I wish we could show you that. We talked briefly about the worship planning meeting. So every Monday morning we meet. We meet as a team at 8:30, and then at 9:30 we meet with the pastors, the musicians, tech, online minister. And we have a Christian education person there because they write Sunday school lessons to go with the sermon every Sunday. So they're there to hear that conversation. In that conversation, we'll talk about, tell us about worship yesterday. Were there any challenges there? What about the microphone that never came on? What was with that? We need to replace that mic. Okay, that's going to cost some more money. Rehashing that, talking about, gosh, we got a lot of great feedback on that sermon. Alexis can share what the online numbers were. We also talk about what the in-house attendance was. Then we look ahead that next week and we look at the lessons, and then we look at how we're going to illustrate that. We've already kind of We have a theme statement that's provided when they do a sermon series. They write it out for us, and they say, what's the current theme sermon series? Don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up on yourself. Don't give up on God. Don't give up on community, et cetera. And so then they'll give us the lessons in kind of a paragraph.
It's written down.
We will look at that and flesh that out musically, traditionally, and contemporary. And then we'll go to the meeting, and then we'll talk about it, and we'll look at translations. Is this NRSV? Is that better than RSV? Or do we need New King James, or do we need NLT? NLT is often helpful for us with a letter to Paul, and Paul's circuitous writing. But we'll look at the translations, and we'll talk about, well, but the Greek says this and that. Well, then this more clearly illustrates that. Let's use NIV for the gospel. And, so it becomes this Bible study, and then we talk, and then we'll hear a lot of our comments we'll hear woven into that sermon, and then we'll go back and go, okay, we ought to change this music. This is what we really need to sing is How Firm a Foundation, or we need to sing Graves in the Gardens, or whatever it is that we need to do as we've sat through that meeting.
Wednesday.
What's that?
That's Wednesday then. Go ahead.
Oh, and then Wednesday I've got a team meeting with just my team. We'll do information on upcoming events. Do they need to request Thomas's time to do the new member orientation and run the technology? Because everything right now is, for us, is this hybrid thing. Members are joining online, actually, but we need to, and they're going to go to the new member orientation virtually. So, do we need to request Thomas there? Do we need Bill to make sure that he's there to run tech for a funeral on a given date? Who's doing what on Sunday? That might be musical roles or whatever. I think that's self-explanatory. What are our tech and personnel needs? Oh gosh, our star camera volunteer that does the center camera, Bill's out of town, what are we going to do? That kind of thing. So that's what we do.
One of the things, if I can interject, that is so helpful about this is, brief backstory, very brief. Everyone on Chrysler's and staff takes what's called the Gallup Strengths Finder test. You've probably heard of it. Myers-Briggs or Enneagram is a similar kind of thing, right? It's a personality test. This thing tests and finds out what are some of the things that you are strong at. Overwhelmingly, people on our team have the responsibility strength. And that sense of that strength of responsibility says, I need to be and I want to be in place where I need to be and ready to go. But in order for that to happen, I need to know. I need to be communicated with so that there are no surprises on Sunday morning. So this is a huge component of that for those of us, myself included, who, I want to be prepared. I want to be ready, and I want worship to look good. So that's a big, big part of this. If you're not doing one of these, you really should consider doing it.
A lot of people will Zoom in for that. They work. Alexis works with a full-time job, but she Zooms in for that meeting.
Tech and setup needs. So obviously mics and cabling, this is helpful so that throughout the week we have a good idea at what exactly we're going to need so that your sound tech isn't running around on Sunday morning like a chicken with their head cut off and then super stressed, and then the quality also suffers. I actually ask every single Wednesday for as much information as I can possibly get. Then our streaming service,
just a laundry list of everything that we
So I mean, there's a checklist that we've kind of evolved to. It's not formalized because most of us have worked through the pandemic together closely. It could be very easily, put into a full, physical piece of paper checklist that just says, hey, make sure these things are working. Is the volume turned up online? Is the video switcher actually working? Do you see the graphics where you need to see the graphics? Just these simple little checks that you have to just carve out time for right at the beginning of service, or an hour or two before you get there. It's just it's become invaluable to us, and it is, even though it's informal for us, it is a standardized thing. We all know how to check our own stuff, and then right before the service is supposed to start and go live, we'll all just go through the bulletin, make sure everyone's on the same page, do a quick prayer, and then boom, we're into the countdown clock running. We're into the online sound going, stuff like that.
So we're going to conclude today's formal slide setup here with letting Alexis finish us up. I know she hasn't had a chance to say much, but it's all very, very concentrated here.
Oh, okay. Well,
Surprise.
so just really quickly, our senior pastor decided that our online ministry was going to be our 4th campus, Christ Online, and about a month or so before we were completely virtual, I was hired on as the online minister with a completely different plan, really. And then it became nothing but online worship for a while. That was my focus. My job is to moderate online, but also build that community. And so that's an evolving process. And as we come out of COVID, it's going to change again. But for now, I am fostering the relationship with the members who are online. Look at the camera. Oh, pastor. Well, they're great at that now. So.
All those who were trained.
Train your pastor.
They do make it a point to welcome online worshipers, and I have a very small team I'm hoping to expand of volunteers, besides myself, to cover all of our worship services, to be simultaneously welcoming everyone online in the chat feature. We have asked them to look at the cameras as much as they can, but balance that, refer to them in their sermons, and...
But the cameras are over the heads of the people, so it's the same thing. You're looking at the body of Christ. The camera's right there, so I'm looking at you, but the camera's going to feel like it's
Well, they don't have to stare at the camera. The camera is basically another congregation member. So they're just looking around, looking at the camera, looking around, just talking to everybody.
And just one quick point that's not up there. There's call-outs that are sort of not scripted, but the pastor will get up there and greet the congregation in person, turn to a camera, and to those worshiping online, thank you for joining us today. Those little things make you feel, if you're watching online, that you're part of it. You're there, even though you're not there. It shows that you're thought about and that it's in the forefront of everyone's mind.
Yeah. Train them.
Train the pastor.
Yep.
And, yep.
We link everything
links.
to everything. That's the takeaway there. Make sure people
so
can
Alexis,
find stuff.
explain how you do that.
Provide the links.
Yeah.
So the website we weren't able to show, but I did have a screenshot in my presentation of it, has each worship service laid out with a Facebook and YouTube link that is updated weekly with the YouTube link for the live worship. Also has a link for the bulletin and link for the Christ Kids TV, the children's sermon. But I email my worship chat volunteers on Friday afternoons with all the fresh links. Even though they really could go to the website and get it themselves, I put it right in front of them so that they're able to, in the timely manner within the service, when it's mentioned, throw up the link. For a while the pastors would say, Alexa, my favorite.
Alexa.
Send them the link. But so now it's more just organic, and I've found that there's just a lot of, they do chat amongst themselves now. Welcome each other, and we try and go quiet during the sermon, although sometimes the pastor will send me questions that I can pose that will be based on the sermon, so we'll throw those in the chat as well. Prayer requests, it's all links, so we're honored to pray for you. Use this link to submit your request. Yeah.
What do you do midweek with these people?
There is a series of social media posts that I post throughout the week. Some of that we do use our paid service to do engaging posts. One that I shared in my talk was one asking for a three-word prayer request. Got lots of, but like I told that group, the best thing that I've done with the online folks is ask them for a picture of their pet. And got 50 cat pictures in a matter of hours. And what that does, as we all know, is boost your algorithm because those folks will continue to see your posts more. So I try and engage them. They are also encouraged to find an online or hybrid class that they can Zoom into. The hope was to get folks geographically centered because we do have folks just across the border in South Carolina that might not live near each other but will just worship online together physically. And that part was shut down because of COVID, and hopefully we'll rebuild that.
I have a question back there.
Yeah. So can you, I walked in maybe 10 minutes late. Can you go through how many hours per week each of you are paid for? Like,
Sure.
what is your job description and what does it cover?
And salary too.
Sure.
You two sound like 40 hours a week.
Right.
Yeah.
Full-time, exempt.
Well, it's exempt, so it's other duties as assigned.
I am at, what is it, 12 hour a week?
And it takes you more than that to do what you do, right? Okay.
Beat the drum.
I guess I need to beat that drum.
We're full-time.
You're both 40 hours a week at
Yep.
doing what you do.
Yeah, but as you know, we work more than that. It's 50 hours a week most of the time, and that's any ministry, you get paid 20 hours, you work 40, so,
Yeah.
This is my whole worship team. She works 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Someone needs to beat that drum.
Her dad.
Other questions you guys have?
Do you use PCO,
PCO, no.
Planning Center Online?
No, we use another service called Worship Planning. It is a discussion internally right now among us. We
Because
should.
when you talk about the communicating
Right.
with the different, and that's what,
Yeah.
like I do on PCO.
Mhm.
When that planner comes out, there's that place for notes for the camera person, notes for the
We
sound
have
person.
so much invested in worshipplanning.com that I've been reticent, and I don't trust that it's all going to transfer over. So if you are singing the traditional choir and you get an email from us, it sends you this link, and you can say, yes, I'm going to be there, no, I'm not going to be there. You can see what the hymns are, and you can go click on that, and it'll give you the hymn, the PDF of the hymn, and if we have a recording of the hymn, it's there as well.
So this is one of those things I'd refer
But I
to
don't
as.
trust that all that's going to just.
So this is one of those things I'd refer to as technical debt.
Did you just hear what she said?
Sorry, what?
You'll do some work to.
Work, it won't all transfer over.
Some of it will, like you tell them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all the fun.
It's very helpful with contemporary especially. So all the band charts are there. They click on Graves into Gardens, and they can see the chord sheet for the guitars or drums. The singers can see the choral score. They can hear a recording of it.
So they're essentially the same, but
it is
PCO
limited.
does do a little bit more than worship planning.
We do, like, all our worship volunteers, our readers, everything.
We've cobbled together 4 or 5 things to do this when Planning Center would be. But like our accountants, for example, they're very familiar with the payroll software and the budgeting software that speaks one thing, and then, oh, by the way, we can bolt on our, congregation information there. So it is that sort of, there's a lot of other things outside of worship that would have to update, and it's just something that you don't take lightly as a
Are you looking at going to an app at all then?
We had an app, and we gave up the
Worship Planning has an app,
It's been removed from the App Store, though.
Yeah, well, it's a mobile friendly site.
Anyway.
Other questions?
Do you guys have a sample of what your service looks like now? That we can see?
What we should just give you is, let me give you the website, and you can stalk us there.
It's youtube.com/Christ Lutheran.
Okay.
Easy enough, right? Yeah, if you go, and we primarily represent the Providence campus.
Okay.
Providence because we're on Providence Road, not because we live in Rhode Island. So that's as you go to that YouTube. Yes, sir.
Has there been any thought or discussion about moving your online presence from a live stream to something that's pre-recorded for your production value to minimize the potential pitfalls of live television and live stream, those technical difficulties?
Not exactly. The only component that we utilize on a regular basis that's pre-recorded is the intro, outro videos like the one we showed you with Scott talking, welcome to worship, blah, blah, blah. The one thing that I would say to that as a professional musician, just that's my career, that's what we do. There's something, this is gonna come out sounding wrong, but I'm just kind of verbalizing what I'm thinking here. There's something a little bit different about the way that as a musician, that I treat the way that I play when I know that I don't have a chance to stop and go do something again.
Okay.
Does that sound wrong? It might on the surface.
You lose the authenticity of it.
That makes sense. I was just,
Right.
it was just something that popped
Yeah,
out of my
no,
mind.
it's a great thought. And we have, especially during COVID, we would use pre-recorded stuff like, we started getting creative with involving people in worship, and so we had the virtual choir, yeah, that was a whole separate sack of potatoes. But we would have, members of our elderly groups saying the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God the Father, and it was a great way to include people and have a pre-recorded element as part of the service. Another great thing that I talked about in mine earlier was when you have someone who's rather long-winded, who likes to get up and share updates about missions or programs, great things to share about. But it's like, okay, we don't need to listen about this for 12 minutes. Please turn off the mic and go sit down. So this is a great opportunity to use pre-recorded videos in that instance, because then you can control and manage how long that's going to be, so you don't have parishioners who are like, okay, is worship going to start now?
There's a question over here too.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, earlier you had talked about how you deal with critical commentary. So I was going to ask if that was addressed. But then also, do you allow for comments on the YouTube, like the catalog YouTube worship services?
They give us critique on YouTube, and then they'll pass that on to me, and then we'll address it, and we'll decide, is this something that we can do something about, or choose not to, or work toward that. Email is I guess because of my job title, and I've been there forever, so I get a lot of emails. Scott will get some of the senior pastor, and then pass them on, and we'll talk about them in worship planning and decide what to do.
You can actually enable comments on the actual YouTube videos, and then you can get...
Yes, so we do. The engagement's fairly minimal, and then you get the usual YouTube bots that just kind of dump whatever in there, and we got to go through manually.
Is there any value to disabling commentary?
We have done it for big events like Good
Friday
and Christmas Eve. You get the occasional jokester in there that feels like they just want to, comment the most obscene thing you've ever seen. So for those big events, we'll turn it off, and then that's what Alexis mostly does. She'll get the sort of super chat version of it where it's instantaneous and she can pull it out.
So to speak to that, if you don't have someone who's monitoring online, I would turn it off. Because
absolutely.
you're not going to be able to see if somebody's put something inappropriate. But if you do have somebody who's monitoring, like Alexis, then you can leave them on unless it's a big festival kind of Sunday or something like that.
And we should note, that's just for YouTube. Facebook, because you do have to log in and there's a name tied to it, we just kind of let go, right?
Yes, and it doesn't get like that. And YouTube also, I find the chat is so minimal that sometimes it is better to have it turned off because majority of folks are streaming that to something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're watching on your smart TV, you're not going to use the Team Tenure remote.
I don't find much value in the YouTube chat.
We have another question here.
I just wonder if you have any tips of finding an IT guy who actually likes talking to people.
Well, when you find one, let us know.
We're still working.
So
great. I just really.
I had the same question sort of come up to me yesterday. Local colleges.
This is the most he's talked in months.
Local colleges, find their IT program. They'd be happy to post your job there. Just to get to know people there. I grew up in the church, so I've always been around. I've been a part of the production side of things for a lot longer than I've been doing this role.
He used to pull my stops on the organ as a fifth grader.
And then look what happened.
I was just saying, find an IT guy who doesn't like the job he's currently in, and then
that's a big one.
Well, so that was just me personally, but find someone who has the responsibility that attribute he was talking about, and find someone who is personable, because generally you can teach them these sort of technical things. If you have someone who knows the technical stuff but has a bad attitude, that's going to cause a lot more friction than if you started with someone who doesn't know and you teach them.
Did I see another hand? Were there other questions?
Thank you guys.
Thank you.